Thank you so much. Namaste, everyone. Um, it's actually a matter of honor that we are holding this talk on the birth anniversary of Sister Nivedita. Um, uh, I don't know how many of you are well versed with her life. So to begin with, let's go through her journey and her life of 44 years and her contribution to India and the feminist movement in India, of what she did for women empowerment, so to speak. Uh, as a lot of you might be aware that Swami Vivekananda's address in the Parliament of Religions in Chicago in 1893 became a huge, huge, huge success. It made him so popular across the world that time, when he spoke of the universal oneness of all religions. And he spoke about India and its place in the world, so to speak, in terms of spreading that spiritual message and the message of inclusivity. Sister Nivedita, who was at that time known as uh, Margaret Elizabeth Noble, born to a family of pastors, an Irish woman born to a family of pastors, also heard this address, and she became deeply impressed by Swamiji. And it just so happened that soon after, she had a chance meeting with him. And later on in her letters, she's written about how this moment changed her life forever. She thought that she was like a headless torso before meeting Swamiji, and she first saw him as a king, then a master, and then through the journey of her life as her spiritual guru and father figure. She met him in 1895, and then she soon after that she came to India in 1898, where she was given the title of Sister Nivedita by Swamiji. This was more like taking her in the religious order of Ramakrishna Math that time, and he asked her to join this life of service to people as a brahmacharini, as celibacy is considered as one of the highest virtues, because passion often gets in the way of maybe delivering your duties when you are thinking of life on such a large scale, where you want to give back to humanity. And he saw that particular quality in her, which I think mostly only a leader, a spiritual evolved soul of that level can see offer in people who they take under their wing as their students and as their disciples. So she came to India during that time. Her first point of work in India was to get on with girl education. She thought that women in India, especially young girls, they were getting married early on, and there were a lot of child widows, and they had no ways to contribute to society without having education. And she started a small school from her own house on Kali Puja Day on 12th November 1898. Yeah, that's when she started the school. It started apparently with 3 kids, and then it became bigger and bigger. Today, it's a heritage site, and people can go visit. It's been developed as a heritage site. Let's come to how she viewed education for women in India, how she viewed education overall. So Sister Nivedita was already an educator back in her hometown. She was inspired by the ideas of the Pestalozzi, I think, if I'm getting the name right, and Pestalozzi and Friedrich Froebel. So they both were viewing education slightly differently. At that time, Sister Nivedita was very impressed by their idea of education, which she said is that education has to be more holistic, and it has to be done in the way that the child understands. It has to be play-based learning, as well as it has to be seeped in the culture of the child. So she was against the idea that a lot of Western education should be given to Indian children. She said that India itself has such a vast uh, uh, background, of educate, like a lot. And India's own culture should become a part of education in India, and all education and learning should be culture based. It should not be a homogeneous kind of key Western, way of learning should be considered as the best way of learning for Indian children. India's own culture should be imbibed in the way Indian children learn and educate themselves. So she believed in this, and she also that time there was also a big movement going on in Bengal about reform. There was a Brahmo Samaj movement which said that there was a lot wrong with Indian culture, and it needed reform. So she came into Bengal at that time, but she also believed that more than reform, we needed revival. So she actually believed that Indian culture in itself was pretty wholesome. And in fact, India should fall back on its culture rather than trying to reform and Europeanize itself, as a country, and as even women should not, like she said, everything European cannot be considered modern, and everything modern should not be considered good. She said that every country should fall back on its own sense of nationality, its own sense of identity. So coming to, so this was a second main contribution to India, was her idea of nationalism. Her idea of nationalism relied on, she said India should be for India, and it should be for Indian people first. There is nobody can tell Indians that we are trying to do good for you. Like the British had this whole narrative that we're giving you infrastructure, we're giving you education. And she said, no, India is, every country should have the idea of Swaraj, of self-governance, and it should fall back on its own culture, its own history, and derive its sense of national identity from that. And it should not be given by the British to Indians. Indians should have their own sense of national identity, which should be which they already have as a people. And she believed in a civilizational idea of the country, of nation. She said, she didn't say it, as in she was inspired by the fact that a nation should not be just a geographical identity, the way it was considered in the West a lot of times, that it's not just a piece of land that is governed by the same law or the same language. It's a thriving entity of people who have come together and share a civilization together, and not just a piece of land. So she believed that India is that civilization entity. It's a living identity. It's a living entity, and it has to be treated in that way, and not through the lens of how the West view nation. So she worked in the area of education. Then she worked in the national movement of India asserting itself nationally. And then her contribution also came to art and science. She helped revive, or in fact introduce an entire movement which is now being called the Bengal art movement, where she, art, like a lot of people like Tagore, and at that time there was this big argument that art should be creatively free, in terms of it can be influenced and inspired from the artist's own expression, and wherever the artist finds inspiration. But she thought, no, Indian art should be inspired by Indian scenes, and it should say something about the Indian way of life, and inspire Indian people when they look at it. So in her book, The Web of Indian Life, she has talked a lot about how wherever you look in India, there is a scene which is very, very intrinsically Indian. And she then she encouraged artists like Nandlal Bose and Abindranath Tagore to draw inspiration from those scenes. Like he drew the very iconic painting of Bharat Mata, which then became a very inspiring motif and a very inspiring scene for the international movement. So she said that art has to inspire, and it should just not be a thing that is like a pretty thing to look at. It should say something, and it should say something about the people that it comes from and the people it speaks to. So she encouraged the Bengal School of Art in that way, and she was of the viewpoint that we should have Indian ideals in all walks of life. And at the time when the world of science, was largely dominated by Western thinkers, one of her closest friends was Jagdish Chandra Bose, who she encouraged to submit his papers abroad, and she promoted his work abroad on quantum physics. And she also said that how a lot of his work was actually an extension of what Indian Upanishads and Indian Vedas already say about life. The same life being a part of all living and inanimate objects. And so she had a very deep understanding of Indian culture. She read a lot, she saw a lot, and she wrote a lot about Indian life. She wrote many books like Kali, The Mother, The Master, As I Saw Him, about Vivekanand ji, and The Web of Indian Life. Actually, one of her most seminal works of how, in which she's very famously written that in India, only in India one saw men in loin cloths discussing Shakespeare and Shelley with the temple bells going off in the background. So she had a very deep understanding of how Indian life was very layered, yet it was very culturally rich. And she said that in India will only progress if it relies on that culture and does not give up on that culture. Today, I also wanted to talk about how she's a very relevant feminine icon. So the way she viewed Indian women was actually very progressive, yet seeped in Indian culture. She said that that Indian women are already rooted in their past, and they should be rooted in their past, and how that is what gives them strength. She talked about the fact that how a lot of Indian women might not be literate, and especially they were not at that time, but she said they were beautifully evolved beings who kept their homes in order. Like, so they had cleanliness on priority. They had the way they talked to their children about Mahabharata and Ramayana, who were very complicated human texts. She said that they were just evolved souls who brought a whole family together. So in that way, they knew how the working of a big joint family is. So she talked about how Indian women had a kind of complexity to them, which was very empowering, which had at the same time, when she spoke about Kali, she spoke about how there were different faces of the Indian women when it came to Durga, who is the quintessential feminine, beautiful figure, but she's also Kali, who can destroy, who's not conventionally beautiful, get it's the same face, or a different face of the same power. So she spoke a lot about how Indian women do not have to pander to any other idea of emancipation in that way. They are already emancipated. They're highly evolved souls who just need to hone that strength. And so, Indian feminism, in that way, she really respected it. That she said that Indian women are already emancipated, they are already empowered. They might not be literate in the Western sense of education, but they were learned souls who believed in the oral culture of learning and knowledge. So in that way, her idea of feminism was way ahead of its time, yet fell back on a very rich culture that we had. Yeah. She talked about how the modern ideal of women robs women of a certain gentleness, a certain purity, which was actually the hallmark of the Indian woman. So she really respected the Indian woman in that sense that, she said that there was a certain gentleness, there was a certain softness to her, which she said was actually her strength. So this was her idea of feminism. Ultimately, she was somebody who's gave her life to India. Even her epitaph reads that her licensed Nivedita, who gave her all to India. She contributed in all aspects of life at that time. She was like a writer, she was an artist, a philosopher, and she believed in synthesis of a lot of dual entities in terms of, she said that science and spirituality should go hand in hand, art and culture should go hand in hand, the national and familial and societal should all go hand in hand. She believed in synthesis, she believed in the basic cultural fabric of India, and she believed that Indians should fall back on it and enrich their lives through it and assert their identity through it. So yeah, I would just like to read some of the things that she's written about in her letters to her friends, and who most of this work is published now. About the national movement at that time, she's written that I have no interest in anything done by government for India. To my mind, what people do not do for themselves is ill done, no matter how brilliantly it seems. She believed in India, an Indian for India. And she also talked about how India should ultimately also become a power that will show the world, as like will become like an identity, which is not only a country in itself, but also become like a spiritual guru to the world. And she believed that India has the spiritual strength and a certain level of depth in the country that can lead to becoming a world leader in that way. I also want to talk to you, when it came to art, she wrote that an Indian painting, if it is to be great, should appeal to the Indian heart in an Indian way. It must convey some feeling or idea that is either familiar or immediately comprehensible. And that's why she encouraged at that time Abhindranath Tagore, Nandlal Bose to visit the Ajanta caves. She said that there was a traditional realism and revivalism that was needed in Indian art, and that's what was called Bengal School of Art later on. Yeah. So when I was talking about how she had a dream for Indian nationality, she wrote that our dream of Indian nationality is not a selfish dream for India, but it is a dream for humanity, in which India shall be the mother of a great cause, shall be the fosterer and the nurse of all that is noble, human, and great. So that was her vision for India, because she believed that India can become like a beacon of hope, not only for itself, but for the world uh, as a whole. Yeah, when it came to the national movement, I don't know if a lot of you know that she was the one who designed the first flag, so to speak. She designed a banner with a Vajra motif, and which was both a consecration and a rallying cry at that time for independence for India. She also spoke about a religion that is not superstitious, but believes in itself a lot. She believed in a slightly more aggressive form of Hinduism, which even Vivekananda ji later on in his life started to follow. And she said that aggressive in in spirit, in terms of trying to encourage people and and uh, just encourage them out of their slumber. That kind of religion was needed. um, yeah, so towards the end of her life, obviously, as I was saying, she dedicated a lot of time to the art movement, and she dedicated a lot of time to the national movement at that time. against the British uh, and to the movement of science for India. And she spent the last few years in Darjeeling. She's written a lot of, she's written 4 or 5 books which are published and give a great insight into a woman who was born Irish but was Bharatiya in every sense of the word. She gave her life to India and the people of India, and she believed in the idea of India, which she said had to be nurtured and treasured at all costs. So yeah, so that's it. I'm open to answering any questions that I might be able to answer about her life. If I don't know, if Ayushi is here. I also wanted to actually share a video, uh, a short video on her life, so that anybody um, who wants to know her life in short, I saw it. If there is time for that, we can do that, or we can open for Q&A, whatever is required.
Yes, you can share the video.
She was once asked, "What will be your future work in India?" She replied, "My life is given to India. In it, I shall live and die." And she lived up to this aspiration. The memorial plaque on her Samadhi rightly reads, "Here reposes Sister Nivedita, who gave her all to India." Sister Nivedita was one of the foremost disciples of Swami Vivekananda. This year, we are celebrating her 150th birth anniversary. Nivedita was born as Margaret Elizabeth Noble in Dungannon, in Northern Ireland, on 28 October 1867. Before meeting Vivekananda, she was an educationist based in London. After teaching Vedanta in America, Swami Vivekananda was visiting London in 1895. In the midst of inner turmoil and void, Margaret listened to him speak. So she accepted Vedanta as her own ideal and Vivekananda as her spiritual master. She also decided to take up the cause of serving India. She recalled later of her guru, "I had recognized the heroic fiber of the man and desired to make myself the servant of his love for his own people." Vivekananda too had recognized the instrument for the work for India. "I am now convinced that you have a great future in the work for India." What was wanted was not a man, but a woman, a real lioness, to work for the Indians, women especially. Margaret reached Calcutta in January 1898. In March, she gave her first public lecture in India. She declared, "I have come to India to serve her with a burning passion for service." This saga of service began with selfless nursing of plague patients. There was a great outbreak of plague in Calcutta in 1899. Nivedita almost risked her own life serving patients in Calcutta slums. Vivekananda had brought Nivedita to India to work especially for Indian women. Swamiji's vision was to create a race of women educators who would work out the problems for women. On 12th November 1898, Nivedita convened a meeting to discuss the proposal for a girls' school. The next day, this school for girls was inaugurated at Nivedita's residence, 16 Boswara Lane. It was blessed by Sri Sharda Devi, Sri Ramakrishna's spiritual consort. Classes started formally on 14th November. 3 little girls were the first students. Nivedita had a total capital of 800 rupees, gifted by the Maharaja of Kashmir. Being a brahmacharini, she had little resources of her own. In spite of that, she managed to provide even clothes and medical treatment to some of the students. It was not easy to get students for the school. as the then Hindu social customs were very rigid. Nivedita, however, went from door to door, pleading to parents to send their daughters to her school. This school has grown into the present-day Sister Nivedita Girls' School in Bagh Bazaar, and Sister's house at 16 Boshpara Lane has been declared a heritage building. It has now been renovated and opened to public. According to Nivedita, women should come forward and sacrifice their narrow interests for the nation. This is the key to women's true education and emancipation. Nivedita contributed immensely in the promotion of science in India. Vivekananda had heard Jagdish Chandra Bose's presentation in Paris in 1900. He got one of his disciples, Mrs. Sarah Chapman Bose, to help Bose patent his discoveries. Nivedita met J.C. Bose in 1898. Later, she was to become a lifelong friend of Jagdish Chandra and his wife, Lady Abala Bose. Anglo officials conspired to suppress Bose's scientific work. Nivedita tried to protect his interests and promote his work. She provided much-needed succor to Bose. She also assisted him greatly in the writing of many scientific books. The present-day Indian Institute of Science, IISc, in Bengaluru is the result of a chance meeting between Vivekananda and Jamshedji Tata. They were aboard the same ship from Japan to America in 1893. Jamshedji was deeply impressed by Vivekananda's emphasis on the development of science and technology in India. Thus, in 1898, he offered to fund the setting up of a postgraduate research institute for scientific education and training. As expected, the British tried to foil these efforts. Lord Curzon was especially vocal in speaking against the feasibility of Mr. Tata's scheme. Nivedita spoke and wrote in favor of the scheme. She met officials and tried to garner support for the cause. The proposed initiative eventually started functioning in 1911. Nivedita also left her mark in the revival of Indian art. She supported the new Bengal School of Art movement. She interacted with the painter Abanindranath Tagore and E.B. Havel, principal of Government Art School, Calcutta. She worked closely with Ananda Kumaraswamy, the leading philosopher and historian of art of that time. She also mentored young artists like Nandalal Bose and Asit Haldar and sent them to Ajanta and Ellora to discover the roots of Indian art. She wrote essays on the national ideals of art in India. As with art, so with education, Nivedita's main idea was that Indians need to discover the national ideals in all spheres of life. Hence, she was part of the movement for national education in India. As an educationist, she believed in holistic education. She said, "Our conception of education must have a soul. It must form a unity. It must take note of the child as a whole, as heart as well as mind, will as well as heart and mind. Unless we train the feelings and the choice, our man is not educated." Sister Nivedita wrote many important essays on how to write Indian history. She said that India is to be understood in the light of its history. Indian history clearly demonstrates that India is one country and one civilization. She was also involved in the Indian national movement. She was on good terms with both moderate and extremist leaders of the Indian National Congress. She had close ties with the underground missionary movement, and especially with Aurobindo Ghosh. Soon, she was under British surveillance and narrowly escaped imprisonment. Nivedita exhorted Indians to develop a sense of civic nationalism, the idea that the nation was higher than the family. She traveled extensively in India, visiting historical sites and giving lectures. There was not a great mind of her times in Bengal who did not know her personally. Her writings and speeches comprise 5 volumes of complete works and 2 separate volumes of letters. She was a gifted, multifaceted, and strong-willed person with immense love for India. Such a great life came to an end in Darjeeling on 13th October 1911. In her will and testament, she bequeathed everything she had for the education of Indian women.